Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I grew up in the FLDS community. It is a polygamous group run by Warren Jeffs, which I moved out of when I was 18 years old.
I was raised LDS. Sam and I have been married for 8 years and have two beautiful babies together.
Yes, we do. And we're very excited to be back with you and to welcome a very special guest, Michelle Stone from the YouTube channel 132 Problems.
Hi, Michelle.
Hello. So good to be with you guys.
We're
Thank
so
you.
excited to have you. We are excited to hear more of the vast knowledge that you have. For those of you who are LDS, you probably understand the cuteness of that name, the 132 Problems. When I read it, I was like, oh, I get it. And for those of you who don't, you will learn more about that later. But if you would like to hear more about what it was like for Sam to grow up in polygamy, please like and subscribe. If you want to hear more from Michelle Stone as we get into it, go like and subscribe her page as well. And we have a special fundraiser for the month of December from Thanksgiving till the end of the year for Holding Out Help, which is a group that helps people who are leaving polygamous communities be able to thrive, have the tools they need to get an education, to find good work, all those type of things.
I know a lot of people that have reached out to Holding Out Help and have received help from them. So we appreciate anything you can do to help them out.
Yeah, and that donate button should be right below to be able to do that. So we're so excited with Michelle. I had watched a couple of your videos and I was like, this is so interesting. I feel like I love diving deep into things. Sam always laughs at me because he's more of a broad range thinker. And I'm like, I want all the details. I want the nitty gritty. I just want to know everything about something. And I go deep. And I was like, I feel like Michelle is just like me. I feel like we're be soul sisters. And then she's going to have all the details and all the knowledge. And so when you reached out, I was just so excited to be able to learn more from you today.
Yes. So Michelle, could you tell us a little bit about your YouTube channel and kind of what got you into this?
Sure. My name is Michelle Stone, and the YouTube channel is called 132 Problems Revisiting Mormon Polygamy. Because, so for those who don't understand, section 132 in the Doctrine and Covenants. So the Doctrine and Covenant is an extra book of scripture that mainly it started with Joseph Smith and contains the revelations from through Joseph Smith to other members of the church, and that so it's the Doctrine and Covenants, and at the very end of it is section 132, which is the only place anywhere in all of Mormon scripture that talks about polygamy. And so that's why the channel is called the 132 Problems. So just really quickly, I used to totally believe in polygamy. I was raised on the wonderful polygamous stories. My grandmother was the oldest daughter of a post-manifesto polygamous family. So we'll explain what that means, I'm sure. But so I was raised thinking polygamy was a beautiful thing that would be in Zion and in heaven. And I didn't even realize how ignorant and naive I was about it until I started digging in and actually studying the scriptures, and just had my mind blown about how many problems there are and how section 132, I don't believe was ever from the Lord. And it's even questionable whether or not how much of it was from Joseph Smith or came later. So I realize it's a big mess. And that's what I've been digging into for the last many years.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm excited to hear more about this. I know the feeling of feeling that polygamy is great and wonderful, because that's how I grew up. We're seeing that in my own family around the house. There were always 3 or 4 mothers around, and it just seemed like a perfectly normal, natural thing to me. So I'm excited to hear kind of some of the problems that you have seen and that you want to share with us.
Yeah, I feel like I said, I totally identify with you in that I remember going through D&C 132 in seminary and reading through it on my own. And I don't know if I glossed over or what. I think that when I became a mother, I looked at it in a whole different way, because what you think is okay or acceptable or you could deal with yourself. Because I didn't want to ever share my husband, so I'll say deal with, but I was like, okay, that might be a thing that I could do in the other life. If I was perfect on the other side, maybe I could do it. Right. Didn't have jealousy and those type of things. But then when you're a mom, and I was like, would I be okay with my daughter doing that? Is that something that I want for her, in this life or the next? Or what if the church brings it back? Or I don't know, all these things. And so then I went back into D&C 132 and I was like, just no. Yeah.
When you actually when you actually study it, it's quite horrifying what it actually says. And I think I must, because I read my scriptures all the time. So I'm trying to get back into how I missed so much of it. But I really think the Book of Mormon talks about the scales of darkness that are on our eyes. And I really think there's like this blindness that you just don't see what you're not aware to look for, maybe.
Yeah.
And I always thought, so naively, like I didn't worry about the sharing my husband part. It was just like, oh, a sister wife to work, like having a lot of children and being so overwhelmed with work and thinking, oh, there'd be a friend to talk to all the time. Like it's just so much ignorance, I guess.
Yeah. And there's definitely a lot of rhetoric that kind of excuses it. And I mean, there's a lot of different theories as to why it even happened. But what was the main one? Like for me growing up, I was always told that being raised LDS, that it was because there weren't enough men for the women.
Right.
Okay. Like
And
that
that
was
the man
one.
needed
Take care
to
of the
kind of help
widows.
provide
To take care of the widows,
Yeah.
right? To take care of the women was a main one. That was probably like the most prominent one that I heard. What was the main thing that you were told growing up?
I can't even think of. I think that, growing up in Utah, we're probably more familiar with polygamy than people even growing up in the church outside of Utah, because it's talked about more.
Right.
But definitely that the Lord needed to raise up a righteous generation. So there needed to be lots of babies born. And there were, all of these widows. And again, every single one of these claims are just so not good. So I should tell a little of the story, because my husband actually one day came to me. I talked about this in my first video, but my husband came one day and had been studying the scriptures and just said, I don't think polygamy was ever of God. And for me, I was like, what are you talking about? You're insane. Like, I'm sure you guys could both relate to that, right? And
Oh yeah.
And like, so I took it upon I was like, I have to go show him how insane he is to think polygamy isn't of God. So that's why I started studying it. And I, started in the scriptures and just was amazed by how little I knew and understood. And then once I was like, oh my gosh, this was never of God. Oh my gosh, it just blew my mind so much that I tried to, you have to talk to people. So I tried to bring it up in some of the groups, some Facebook groups and some different, and it's way too hot of a topic. It's like radioactive. That topic is not allowed in this group. And it's funny because a lot of LDS people are actually so pro polygamy that, and then a lot of people have such feelings of abhorrence to it. And that's why it's contentious, is because a lot of people are like, you can't condemn polygamy. You can't say it wasn't of God, which is interesting that we're still in that mindset, even in the LDS church. Then, so I started my own group to talk about it. And I was actually really pleased to find out that a lot of polygamous men joined, no polygamous women joined, because I don't know how much they get to engage.
But technology, a lot of them.
Right. A lot of polygamous men joined, and even some of the biggest polygamy scholars, the people who write in defense of polygamy, joined. And that was thrilling to me, because I was able to encounter the very best arguments in favor of polygamy, the very best ideas. So I was like, oh, good, maybe I'll learn something. I was always open to, I just want the truth. I'm totally open. And it was amazing to me how time after time after time after time, these arguments would just dissolve. They were so bad. Like everything to defend polygamy is just so weak and so bad and based on nothing. And so it got to where, I never knew if I should laugh or cry, because these really bad ideas have caused so much pain and so much suffering. And so I feel like I just want people to know truth. We, in the gospel, we call Satan the father of lies. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because really good people doing their best to live the life they think that is right still leads to really bad outcomes if they're based on lies.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. And I've seen that in my own community. So
yeah,
it's heartbreaking, but when someone is only told about the good things and they don't go deep dive into everything and learn everything that's going on, it's very easy, like you said in the beginning here, to just kind of brush over it. And then you go back later and you say, wait, I've read this? How could have I read this and not noticed all of these problems? And
Right.
like a lot of leaders of churches say, that you find out something new every time you read the scriptures. But in this case, it wasn't good stuff. So,
Right. Well, I think it's part of the polygamist training and mindset to only speak about the good.
right.
And that actually goes back in my family as well, even though we're LDS, not FLDS. And when I started to learn all of this and went and talked to my mom and started to ask her some of this other perspective, then a whole new set of stories came out that they just had been trained not to talk about. And so I think, and it's hard because, it is good to focus on the positive. Like in your marriage, if you want your marriage to stay happy, you focus on the good, right? So
Right.
Yeah.
there is truth to that. But when it gets to the point that you aren't true to yourself and you ignore true deep pain and things that are really quite toxic and abusive, then we enable bad things to continue because we just smile and don't talk about the bad.
Yeah. And I feel like, at least for me growing up, like LDS culture too, when you talked about the two groups of people, there's the people who are really for it and really want to defend it. I don't even know if they're defending polygamy anymore as much as they're trying to defend that nothing could be wrong with the church.
Exactly.
At least that's my experience. It's like, it's not actually 132. Because like you said, if you read D&C 132, I remember telling my mom this, who is still active LDS. And I was like, if you read D&C 132 with an open heart, like completely open, fresh eyes, open heart, you will be surprised. Like I can just promise anybody that if you go in with fresh eyes and no like predisposition to anything. But it's like the idea of the beginning roots of the church is so sensitive, right? Because, a lot of people that bash on the church or are anti-Mormon, they bash on the beginnings of the church. And because polygamy is tied to that, I think people fear, well, we can't let that be wrong. Then everything goes out the window, right? So I think that's more of the fear of there being something wrong with the beginning history of the church than polygamy itself.
Right. Because if Joseph Smith did something wrong in the beginning, then what else does that mean?
Yeah. And people fear that, I think it's a fear thing. And then you have the group, like my grandmother was a convert when she was like in her mid 40s. And I was just on the phone with her. She's 75 now. And I was on the phone with her a couple weeks ago, and I said something about one of our YouTube videos. And I said something about Joseph Smith being polygamist. And she was like, Joseph Smith was never a polygamist. There are like converts later that, and she was a convert in Chicago. She doesn't have any of the Mormon culture or any of the Utah Mormon culture. And that was just something that even now, after years, like she just didn't even know because it never got brought up in the discussions, right? That doesn't get brought up in Mormon missionary discussions. And so I was like, yeah, he was, well, maybe he had like one. I was like, no, he had like a lot more wives. Like, let me tell you a little bit about it. Right. But there's the two sides, like people that are ignoring it. And now it gets so kind of shoved under the rug of like, it makes people feel uncomfortable that I feel like newer converts don't hear anything about it.
Can I jump in for a second? Because there were actually a couple of things I wanted to respond to as you were talking. I can't remember all of them, but a couple of them, I think. First, I think the reason it's so sensitive to us is because of our idea that the prophet can never lead the church astray, which we have canonized in, what is it? It's in the Doctrine and Covenants at the end, one of the manifestos maybe. Yeah. And the fascinating thing there is that grew directly out of polygamy. Even that idea we have in the church that the prophet can never lead the people astray came from Wilford Woodruff during the polygamy crisis when the LDS church was going away from polygamy and the FLDS were breaking off. So isn't that fascinating?
That is.
And so we got ourselves tied up in knots going, no, you can't say this was right because we have this idea that the prophet can't do anything wrong, which I also think is a false tradition, is a bad idea. And we can talk about that a little bit more. And so I think that's the heart, the core of what the emotion is about, is people feel like that sacred idea of theirs is being attacked. And then with regard to Joseph Smith, so there is a huge growing movement in the church that doesn't believe that Joseph Smith was involved in polygamy.
So it's more than just converts?
Yeah, well, people like for me, a lot of people like to say the science is settled. And that's a term that in general I don't like, because whenever you're saying that, you're hiding something, like let's have a discussion.
Science is never settled. That's what science means, but
right. And I was in a place where I was like, okay, Joseph Smith got mixed up in this. And I I was able to come to a place of peace with that, or with either way. I was like, okay, either way, I can have peace with this, because my connection is to God, not necessarily the church. And like, even the Book of Mormon tells us that there will be false traditions and bad ideas, right? And that we need to. So I'm like, all of this is just more confirmation of the Book of Mormon for me, and I'm okay, whatever the case is. But the more that I have studied, the more I'm like, oh, wow, like this really, it is possible that Joseph and Emma Smith were telling the truth, because neither one of them ever acknowledged polygamy, ever said. They both, throughout their entire lives, denied ever participating in it. And everything we have that says they did it comes from the Utah era, comes much later. There are a few things like at the time, but that's based in the lies that William Bennett was spreading, who was doing, this might be so confusing to everyone, but there was a bad character named William Bennett. Was it William Bennett? Do I have his name right?
I think it's a different last name, but I know his name was William, the one who was writing.
Well, William Law, but then there was Bennett.
Oh, that was
Dr. Bennett. Anyway,
Okay.
I might have his name wrong, and that's embarrassing if I do, but he was the one doing the spiritual wifery thing and spreading the rumors that was happening. So we don't know. And a lot of people will hear this and go, oh my gosh, of course Joseph Smith did it. But that's based on the claims of the women who were under the power of Brigham Young and the Utah Church. And like you did, you're doing your fundraiser for Holding Out Hope, which is such a great organization. If you're in Utah, 2,000 miles from anything, with nowhere to go, and like, a lot of these women had to do what they were told. I have a couple of episodes on that. So there is room to go, okay, we don't know for sure. That's
Interesting.
That's way interesting. Yeah, I've never heard that from anyone that has like any evidence behind it. It's always just been like what seemed to be just a lack of knowledge, or like a lack of them being told about polygamy in general. So now I have something new to dive into.
We're gonna, on my channel, that's the next big thing we're going to tackle. Is I just want like people, again, with the best arguments on each side, to come on and talk about Joseph Smith, because this idea that the science is settled, I think does a disservice to all of us. Again, it's good for us. We have a tendency to listen to what people say something says. I like to get in and see what the actual evidence is. All of us can look at the actual evidence instead of just taking other people's word for it.
So my main question with that would be, so then did Joseph Smith not write D&C 132?
So Doctrine and Covenants 132 was not in the original Doctrine and Covenants. So there was a Doctrine and Covenants published in 1835 that Joseph Smith oversaw, and it included section 101, which was the article on marriage, which very adamantly declared monogamy. It says, inasmuch as this church has been accused of polygamy, we declare that marriage is between one man and one woman. It's actually quite a beautiful section, how the marriage ceremony is done. It's so equal and between the man and the woman. So that was, it wasn't a revelation, but Joseph Smith approved it and included it. And then it was included in the next Doctrine and Covenants that he again approved, that was published right after his death in 1844. And it wasn't until 1876, that it was included, that section was taken out of the Doctrine and Covenants. So Brigham Young died, I believe, in 1877. So the entire time that the Mormons were living in Utah, they were living in opposition to their canonized scriptures with polygamy, right? And it wasn't until after, like, Brigham Young's death that 101 was removed and section 132 was added, with no common consent, no vote of the people, no anything. They just did that.
But and they said that it was, I mean, obviously in the scripture, it says that it's Joseph Smith who had that revelation, right?
So that's based on the journal of William Clayton. William Clayton was Joseph Smith's, I'll get some of these details wrong because I don't have it all fresh. But William Clayton was the one who wrote it out, apparently. It was a meeting between William Clayton, Hiram Smith, and Joseph Smith. And William Clayton's the only one that lived to tell the tale of the meeting, and according to him. And William Clayton was already living in polygamy, right? And so according to him, Hiram said to Joseph, just write out the revelation, and I'm sure I can convince Emma. Because the story we also have is that Emma and Joseph were in division. And see, that's I'm releasing a couple of I'm releasing in the next few weeks one on Joseph and Emma, because people don't even know that Emma Smith was pregnant with Joseph's child when he died. So these claims that they were at each other's throat, and Joseph had no other children with anyone other than Emma. Even the claims, like there was a mother who told her daughter, who was named Josephina, told her on her deathbed that she was Joseph's child. So that was always assumed to be the truth. Once they did the DNA, they found out that all of the claims were lies. So we do have a lot of evidence that people lied about polygamy, but we don't have good evidence that Joseph participated. Isn't that interesting? So anyway, so we did not have Section 132 at all. Right. So all of those people were denying polygamy. Brigham Young, Eliza Snow, all of them were denying that. So they were lying one way or the other, right? And then in 1852, the Mormons came to Utah in 1847, days of 47 we have here. And then it was 5 years later in 1852 that they had this special conference where they finally acknowledged polygamy, that they were doing polygamy. And that is where Section 132 was presented and read. So no one had even heard of it until then. And Brigham Young claims that he had it locked in his drawer of his desk, which is so like, did his desk come across the planes? Like how, he just said, I've had this locked in my drawer, and then he pulls it out right then. And it's interesting. I have episodes on all of these things because also Brigham Young prophesied many things at that meeting, and it's actually important. I think it's enlightening to go look at what his prophecies were and how none of them came true. And, so where we're looking to our source, I think it is interesting. We need to get all of this information before we just assume Joseph Smith did all of these things, because we don't know for sure. We do know this. Brigham Young was the author of the priesthood ban for
I was
for
just going
Blacks.
to say.
That wasn't Joseph Smith, and we have the history to show how the records were changed to make it look like we didn't have Black priesthood holders under Joseph Smith. And we have a lot of, now that we have the Joseph Smith papers, we can see a lot of things that were scratched out and changed. Quotes that we have of Joseph Smith supporting polygamy were all later additions and changes to the actual papers then. So it gets complicated.
It's so okay. Yeah. Sorry. I have to get out my questions now in my mind. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's starting to make sense why the FLDS focused so much on Brigham Young's teachings.
And I just recently had a discussion with my mother, and we were talking about, because the FLDS, some of their newest revelations have a lot of racism, very clear
always
racism.
been that way.
And it's always been that way. But I was telling her, I was like, yeah, it's weird because I know that Joseph Smith gave priesthood to Black people. Like, I know that was like recorded. And I said, but my shelf, honestly, a ton of like the history shelf that like broke it for me was more Brigham Young. Like I got beef with Brigham Young, I guess, like the way he practiced polygamy, the way he treated his wives. There's so many, the racism, but I know like so many of those things came from him. And so, I mean, I'm excited to learn more about that Joseph Smith theory, not because I think that he's a perfect like saint or, but I want to know the truth,
Right.
And if there is truth to be known, and that's something that I feel like when people are going through faith transitions and they'll be like, well, some things aren't meant to have an answer. And I'm like, yes, but if there is an answer, I want to know. And you can't just say that I shouldn't have answers to any of my questions because everything should be based on faith when there are answers.
Right.
I completely agree with that. I think one of the biggest challenges of a faith transition is figuring out what is baby and what is bathwater, right? Like, because some people, it goes all the way to like, there's no God, there's no purpose. And that kind of nihilism can be a really painful, difficult place to live. And they still have to figure out, like just knowing that things aren't true doesn't tell you what is true. It doesn't give you a new foundation for your life. So that's where the hard work begins of what is of value, what is true, what do I keep, what do I throw out? And I think that's the important journey to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we say all the time, like, it's hard when you're raised, like you said, Mormonism, like there's so much, it used to be so black and white, or maybe that was what we were talking about before we started filming, but it had always been this black and white. And I was trying to explain to someone who's never been LDS before, and I was like, when your whole life you're told that this is the one and the only truth, and if you believe, and then you find out that something and it's not true, and you feel like it crumbles, then it feels like nothing can be true.
Right.
Instead of like, oh, there might be truth somewhere else, because you're told your entire life that none of those other places. There's no space for the full truth anywhere else.
Right.
And so you're in this really tough space of trying to find bits and pieces of truth, and then trying to find things that are going to end up being just your truth, because we're also told that's not a thing. Like, your truth isn't a thing. It's God's truth. It's the prophet's truth. It's Revelation's truth, but not really emphasis on your own personal truth. And so, yeah, it can leave you open to such a massive amount of emptiness that is just like so horrifying and so sad and so empty. And I don't think people realize that when people go through faith transitions, they're like, oh, they're taking the easy way out. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, nothing could be further from the truth. There's such a huge void there that you're trying to figure out.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes your religious beliefs can be based on convenience. That is for sure. I know that there's a lot of people that I've talked with that stay in a certain belief because it's more convenient, and they don't want to have to deal with the hardship of accepting that there might be something wrong with it. So I've seen that a lot.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, and I think it is. It's because it's scary to step into that abyss of, wait, this was my foundation. Now where am I? I have an episode on that where I talk about it in an episode called House of Cards, because it is an important thing that a lot of people have to navigate. But one thing I want to say is, I know that because Melissa, you mentioned you like my truth, and I don't think it's necessarily that we each have that there is no truth and we all just, like, I don't necessarily agree with that. But at the same time, how do we know what is truth, right? I think that's what people say when they say my truth. I think what they're saying, what feels true to me. They're not just trying to make up reality. And actually, that's in keeping with the Book of Mormon. Like, the whole way through the Book of Mormon, we're taught how to find truth. And I have a whole list of scriptures here. It's always based in what the Spirit of God or the light of Christ tells you in your heart and in your mind. And I think that's one thing that's so important about this, is that we've gotten it turned upside down, both in the LDS church, and I think even worse in the LDS church, where we instead are taught to look to an external source for truth. This sort of follow the prophet idea. The prophet cannot lead us astray, which we said grew right out of polygamy, I think is a really spiritually dangerous idea for so many reasons. It doesn't allow or encourage us to live up to our opportunities and our potential to come to know God. But even worse, it leaves us open to what can happen when we put our trust in things outside of us. I did an episode recently on the law of Sarah. Is that something either of you were familiar with, have heard of?
No,
not a whole lot.
It's not even you, Sam. Okay, it's not. So section 132, and I think some of the worst verses in it are like 61 through 65, and right in there, I think it's verse 64, talks about the law of Sarah, and I did an episode on that and how Warren Jeffs interpreted that and how horrifically he interpreted that and what he claimed it meant and what he forced his wives to do to fulfill that law, and if those girls had been taught to what the Book of Mormon teaches, how to find truth, which is within their own hearts and minds and their connection to God, they would have been far less vulnerable to that kind of abuse. And I think that holds true for all of us.
Along that line, it is interesting too, because while I agree that, like, the truth, the people are trying to say that it's really, my truth is just being able to find truth and be able to find what's true. But one interesting thing, and this was probably what you're thinking of, is that the people who are living polygamy, like the FLDS, if you were to ask them how they came to those conclusions, they would say that they did search and find for themselves and find that it was true in their hearts and pray, and that it's between them and God and not between them and Warren Jeffs. Right.
Because that's something you have to watch out for, is that the power of the mind that we have, that I don't think any of us realize how powerful that is, that the Warren Jeffs and other leaders out there will tell their people to go and ask God if it is true, but they have it ingrained so much on their mind that
they've been manipulated.
By the time they go and ask God if it's true, they're receiving the answer that they think is coming straight from God, that it is true, because they feel good about it in their heart, because they feel that this is the truth. So that is just something that you have to watch out for in all religions, that, just because you're feeling that it is true doesn't mean, in Warren Jeff's case, that it is good.
And I feel like that's almost, you're like a victim of your circumstance in a certain point in any way that you're raised, right? No matter what religion it is, whether it's FLDS or LDS, it's one thing to say, okay, there shouldn't be a man between God and myself. Although if you believe in a prophet, I guess technically you do believe there's supposed to be a person between you and God that's supposed to be helping to guide you in those decisions. But still at the end of the day, that person, when you said, oh yeah, we have this follow the prophet mentality. And I'm like, yeah, because at age 3, that's the song that we're singing, right? Follow the prophet,
I know.
follow the prophet, follow the prophet. He knows the way. I was the primary chorister when we went through our faith transition.
And that's hard.
It was hard.
It was.
It was hard. And I remember getting ready for I had done it for 4 years, and it was the 4th year, right in the midst of everything. And I remember trying to avoid that song like the plague, because I just broke my heart at that. And some of the other songs that we were singing, and as they were singing it, and I knew in my mind that these words were not true. And I still felt what I at that point would have thought was the Spirit. And so I'm getting goosebumps from my kids singing this beautiful song that was all about following Brother Joseph. And I just remember thinking in that moment, so much more of this is like a condition of my circumstance than what I even realize. Because I have these conflicting, the way that I was taught to feel things spiritually was giving me the goosebumps and telling me one thing, testifying of truth. My mind was knowing new facts, knowing that it shouldn't be that way, and knowing that it wasn't true. And I was left in the middle going, oh my word, I don't know where to go from here. I don't know what to do other than I can't teach these kids anymore that they need to be following a prophet. They need to follow their spiritual experiences. And here I'm having a spiritual experience in that moment that's conflicting hard truth with what I was raised to be true, and trying to forge that path into what I could believe.
It's tough.
It's just so tough.
So complicated.
So complicated.
Yeah, I think that is the challenge, because for me, I do believe in the confirmation of the Spirit. I do believe in connection to the divine. And even when we say, oh, it's just your mind, I think that's mixing it up. Even if God is our mind, that's powerful, what our mind is capable of, even if it is just that and not an external God, right? And so for me, I think it's a matter of getting in and finding out what were my motivations, what powers were acting on me, and developing discernment. Discernment is something we're taught a lot about in the scriptures, right? And so, like I listened to your story of being brought together, right? And to me, I feel divinity in that. I do feel guidance in that. I have a similar story in my life. So I do think that there's room for the divine. And for me, when I have an experience like that with sort of the cognitive dissonance, I'm like, okay, what is the portion that is true that I'm feeling confirmed? Maybe it is how much I love these children and getting to hear them sing these parts that are true, right? And maybe what I'm not liking is, because I have had that overwhelm. I've been the primary chorister many times, or even sitting in the congregation and hearing beautiful songs that are sung, and you're just overwhelmed. And there's a difference. There is the Spirit that I believe in still, and then there's also the untruth. And so for me, it's a good exercise to try to parse that out and see what is confirmed and what is not, what is worth keeping. And I really think for me, as we're trying to do that on our journey with God, God is so patient with us and so willing to help and lead us and be patient with the things we get right or wrong along the way. I've definitely gone through I've gone through deep faith transitions. I look at them as progress, not stepping back, hopefully, because we learn more and more. I've always had the answer to stay in the church, but it's been unique to me, and God has told me how to do it and why to do it, because you guys are parents now, when I have a big family and raising children and going, wait, what does this mean for this child and this child and this child, and having them come home from church, from primary and young women and seminary, and sitting down and talking to them about, okay, what were you taught? And okay, now this is what I think about all of those things, having to sort of undo some of what they were being taught that I disagreed with, and having to wonder then, well, then am I teaching them to like not believe what they're being taught? It's so complicated to make those decisions. So the best I've been able to do is go, okay, God, where do you want me? And that's, I think that if we are all in a place where we're just doing our best to ask, where do you want me? What do you want me to do? That's the best we can do. Like, I do think there's universal truth. I think once we all know everything, we'll all agree. But each of us can only see little parts of it at any given time. And it's so easy to think we know a lot more than we know anywhere, right? To know for sure that Joseph Smith was a polygamist, or to know for sure that Mormonism or FLDS is true, or to know for sure that there's no God, or to, it's really easy for us to be a little too certain of what we know.
I love your perspective. I love everyone's perspectives, actually. This is great. And I think you're right on. It's important for us to just realize that we're all on our own journey, and we shouldn't be judging others because they believe differently than we do. We're all trying to do our best, trying to figure out life. Nobody has all the answers. Amen to what you just said. Nobody has all the answers, even though some people think they do. And I think that we're all just trying our best to figure it out and to progress and live the best life we can.
And having the love and respect for others in it. That's one thing, Sam and I say, like, the more we learn, the less we know.
Yes, absolutely.
That's been kind of like our, I don't know, slogan for our everything, rather than faith transition, faith progress, our progress in our journey has definitely been that. And I feel like it's also given us the space to accept and love people for where they are, instead of a mindset of trying to convince everybody that the way that we think and that the way we think is the only right way. And so being able to have that room of being like, I can understand why you feel those feelings and why you feel like you do in this religion, or you feel like you do in this religion, and we can understand those. And I feel like when it comes from a place of love, like Sam and I have said, like you said, with our story of meeting and things like that, the more we've looked back on a lot of those experiences or with those children, I'm like, I could definitely tell that I feel truth or the way that I discern things is always with love. Like, it's always, I feel love strongly, whether it's love for those children, whether it's love for Sam, like when we were dating, I remember telling him I felt the Spirit more once I met him than what I ever had before. And now I look back and I'm like, it's not that any of those things, like for me, I'm like, it's feeling the guidance of love, falling in love and feeling.
We're taught God is love, right?
Exactly.
And love, like that's what I think. I've taught my children, because they used to come home with lessons about the importance of having a testimony of Joseph Smith, or the importance of, just these lessons. And I was like, why are we doing that? Why are we setting up this shaky foundation? Like, to me, it's love and truth. You take love in this hand, you take truth in this hand, and you go. You want to speak love and truth, and whatever builds those things in your life, go that way. Whatever lessens those things in your life, don't go that way. That, it's like, I'm anti-shelf. You know how in our church we have the big, like, put it on the shelf. And to me, it's like, we don't need a shelf. Why do we have scriptures that tell us that God can teach us the truth of all things? And yet we're like, don't ask that question. Don't ask that question. Don't dig into that. That's not who God created us to be. People that are scared of shaking things up too much or looking in, don't look in that. I'm like, no, let's get in there and clean out that attic and do what we can. And,
good.
Take it bit by bit as you can. You don't want to get overwhelmed. You can't dig into everything at once.
Yeah.
But God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And any question that we're afraid to ask, I don't think that's inspired by God.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm anti-shelf. I'm gonna steal that phrase from you.
I think that's great
it.
for your children too, because that means that you're there with them as they grow up, helping them figure it out, right? Because as a young boy growing up, I always look back and I think, man, the millions of questions I had that I didn't feel like I was allowed to ask, I had to figure out on my own. That was not the best way to do it. It would have been so much better as a young boy to be able to go to my parents and say, hey, I have all of these questions, and then let's figure it out together. Instead of just saying, hey, this is the way it is. Excuse me. Don't you dare ask any questions about it. This is the fact, and that's that. So it's very good that you are willing to discuss these types of difficult topics with your kids, I would say.
And I want to express just a little bit of I'm not that you are not, but like compassion for, I think in particular, the mothers in FLDS, because I know as an LDS mother, I would never have even recognized, let alone acknowledged this before my faith journeys. But you are filled with fear. The fear of how do I do enough to teach my children enough so that they will follow the one path to God, so that we'll have no empty chairs in heaven. And I think in polygamy, that's so much bigger, where your children, if they leave, you lose them for this life, not even just the next, Well, and to be able to take the fear away from parenting is one of the best gifts we can give.
Yeah, 100%. And you're right about the FLDS, like the amount of pressure, everything falls on the head of the mothers. And some of the revelations that we've recently received from Warren Jeffs, just even the fact that if they talk badly about their husbands, or their husbands aren't following the priesthood properly, and they try to report them for not following, which this is how a lot of abuse happens, right? If they report, well, they are not trusting the priesthood, and then it's their fault that their husbands aren't living up to the priesthood. But if you also tell on them, then that's also not having faith in the priesthood. Like, they can't win. There's no winning. It is, everything's going to fall on the woman's head. Their husband's priesthood, their children's eternal salvation, everything is 100% their fault, their responsibility. And it's to a level.
They're the built-in scapegoats. They're the built-in scapegoats. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just recently found out, we were reading, we're going to be doing a video soon on this, but they give very, very, very specific details in a revelation in August on the different worlds and planets, and for each degree of glory. They give a lot of details.
Is this from
Warren Jeffs?
From Warren Jeffs, yes.
So in August.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
Yes. Okay. I've never seen, in the LDS Church, we're taught that there's celestial kingdom, the three kingdoms of glory, the terrestrial, the telestial, outer darkness. They don't give a lot of details because nobody knows the details, right? But Warren just had a revelation, very, very detailed, on who is going to be in which planet and where, names of planets, the whole shebang. And at the end of it, they said, and then the one unholy planet for men only, the sons of perdition. So I tell Sam, I was like, hey, babe, you got your own planet over here. And his cousin was staying with us, Joanna. She's been on our channel before. And I was like, so Joanna, what happens to you? They said this is men only. And she said, well, they tell us women that if we leave the church, we turn into nothingness.
Disappear. Poof.
She goes, our souls can be recycled for other souls, but we will be gone.